Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountaintop to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada all the way through 14 states to Louisiana. The folks that live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings and cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Benton. I was born and raised in these very mountains by a family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains, and we'll take a look through the eyes of an Appalachian and some outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, good friends. Hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. As we go through life, we meet folks from near about every walk of life. Folks that we might work with, meet in a restaurant, or maybe they're just our neighbors. Now, we all try our best to get along because most folks I meet want the same thing out of life that I do. They might do it a bit different than I would, but everybody's got their own kick going, and as long as they ain't hurting nobody, who am I to judge anybody? Heck, I've done worse than most folks listening here today and pretty much enjoyed every one of them, or every bit of it. No, nothing that would hurt anybody, but nothing I'd go tell my grandma about either. That being said, there are folks out there that cross certain lines that just shouldn't be crossed. And when those lines get crossed, it ain't going to end well for anybody. So call your mom and them. Y'all come on in and have a sit down while I tell you one that did just that. Now, on the morning of March 25th, 2009, a 41-year-old lady by the name of Kay Parsons woke up, got after it to get ready to go for another day, in the town where she lived in Grovetown, Georgia. Now, she had her a busy day to work through, so she jumped out of bed and went to wake up her son. Yeah, I remember jumping out of bed when I was about 41 years old. Now it's more like watching a body exhume itself from a 40-year-old grave. Anyway, as with any 12-year-old, especially the boys, he done got a good bit of griping in, having to get up so early. Probably, if I remember correctly, because it's been a few years, he just went to sleep about 30 minutes before time to get up and start with. Kay just did what we all do in a case like that. We just whip the lights on and watch him hiss like a vampire at sunrise. Once she saw that the youngin's feet was on the floor, and downstairs she went, like all moms do, to fix him up whatever quick little breakfast he might want. Then she went to get dressed herself. Her husband David was on the left coast in Los Angeles on business all day, and he'd had a good career in the military, and not that it really matters to the story, but I couldn't try as I might find what branch he served in. Now, once he got out, he saw a way to make a pretty good living by being a military contractor. That meant that he might have been retired from it, but he now worked for the military, but he wasn't actually enlisted in it anymore. And most of the time, them contractor guys tend to make what we might call a killing. David had contracted a job working at Fort Gordon Army Base 4 years earlier, and that's what brought the family on down to Georgia. Now, being that he was a contractor, you might say that he was rich compared to what he was making when he was enlisted. Now, that made you think that one might say that the dream came true for folks in the Parsons family. They were able to buy their 2-story, 4-bedroom house. The only problem with the whole setup was that David would have to travel right smart for work. That left Kay to hold down Fort Parsons all by herself sometimes while David was doing what he was doing to support the family and doing pretty good at it. Kay and David had went all the way through school together and had been quite an item when they was in high school. Folks said the two of them had the kind of relationship that just plain made other folks sick with jealousy, wishing they could find a partner like they could get along with that well. Two of them worked together like a well-oiled soybean combine. If one needed something, the other seemed to already know what it was and was on it before anybody even had to say anything. But the truth stingeth like a whole swarm of hornets. Kay and David had been going through a rough patch for a spell. Kind of like a squirrel that you kill before the first frost. You go to skinning what looks like a nice one and find warbles all under the skin. There was a whole lot more going on than folks could see outside. They've been getting in some really pretty heated debates, to the point where her son probably turned off wrestling just to watch them go at it. Then after they arrived at the ceasefire, they just walk around acting like one another didn't even exist for days or sometimes a week or so at a time. At which point their son probably turned wrestling back on to break up the boredom. Almost sounds like I've been there, don't it? That catches us back up to the morning of March 25th, which was after Kay got all dressed and back downstairs to the kitchen where little feller was finishing up his cornflakes. They bebopped it out to the car and boogity-boogitied on to school. On the way out, they drove past the house next door. It was owned by Becky and Tony Sears, along with their youngins. On the very day that Kay and David had moved in, Becky and Tony dropped by with food to welcome them to the neighborhood. That was probably greatly appreciated by the two of them after going at it all day like killing snakes just to try to get everything moved in and likely not getting a meal break just to get it all done. Well, because from then on, the neighbors became such good friends that folks saw them as pretty much one big happy bunch of folks. Must have been a real nice, I guess, to have somebody that you become such good friends with right off the bat in a new town. Now, they ended up being such good friends that one of the Sears boys was on the same baseball team as Kay and David's son, which afforded the families even more time together. And as if that wasn't enough, the two families would even go on vacations together. Becky even got Kay a job at the physical therapy clinic where she worked. Then, not long after Kay and Becky started working together, they joined Weight Watchers. Kay said that she owed it to Becky for helping her meet her weight loss goal. Every day, Becky and Kay would get on the phone or get face to face and compare weights to talk about who lost the most. Kind of made Kay feel funny that Becky was making a friendly little competition out of it by wanting a fat report every day, but she had to admit it. By golly, it worked. But here lately, Kay had been so caught up in the problems that her husband David were having that she hadn't even talked to Becky for a spell. Kind of sounds like neighborly love might have soured just a mite, don't it? Or maybe somebody was getting involved in a few slap and tickle sessions with somebody that they hadn't ought on the side. Anyway, Kay dropped little man off at school, and she went through the McDonald's drive-thru because sometimes Weight Watchers can just sit down and shut the hell up. We'd rather hear that sausage and egg McGriddle along with a side of hash browns preach us a good sermon first thing in the morning. And I'm all about that. Kay must have liked the gospel according to Mickey D's because she scarfed it down with the gusto of a hound dog. Now, she did that because she's in a hurry. A handyman named Mitch Cozart was coming by to have a look at them and maybe repair the back door. We know that Kay pulled back in her garage at 7:15, got out of her car, walked into the house carrying her McDonald's varnish flavored latte and her McDonald's bag that now didn't have so much as a crumb in it. Well, about 8:30, Handyman Mitch stepped up, probably rocking that handyman walk where they look around, noticing other stuff that needs fixing so they can bring it up in the conversation. That's just good business. Now, he lit on Kay's front porch where he took pushing the doorbell button like he was sending Morse code. He knew Kay was expecting him, so he was kind of surprised when nobody answered the door. After a few minutes of poking at the button, he whipped out his phone and called Kay, and still nothing. Mitch figured his best course of action was to take to peering in the windows, which would get a man's ass whipped where I come from. But he couldn't see anybody inside, so he walked around to the back. Now, he was there to fix the French doors anyway, so he figured he'd go ahead and take a look at them since he drove all the way over, and he needed to be doing something to kill time while he was waiting on Kay to come out of her hiding or finish whatever she was doing. When he got around back, he saw the French doors and stood there and looked at them. He saw one of the window glasses, and the door was completely smashed to bits, and the door was hanging open. I'd be thinking that door's a whole lot more wrong, has a whole lot more wrong with it than I thought. It's going to take a little more fixing. But he yelled through the door for Kay, but it was as quiet as a mausoleum during a military funeral. Now, Mitch was just like us. He'd seen a whole slew of them crime shows and cop shows, and he knew better than to go inside the house and wreck a possible crime scene. So he whipped out his phone again and called 911 to report what looked like it just might be a break-in. He was walking back down the driveway while he was talking to the operator, and that's when he saw a young feller with black hair sitting on a wall across the other side of the road, giving him what he thought might be that crack-eyed thug look. Mitch made his report and snapped what was probably one of them flip phones closed, and Crack Eyes yelled at him. He walked over and see the young feller looked pretty tore up, and it didn't look like a crackhead situation at all. He told Mitch his name was Michael Bowers, and he lived next door to Kay, and then he said that he was Kay's friend, Becky's oldest son. Now, Mitch asked Michael if he was okay, and Michael told him no. He said he'd overheard Mitch's phone call to 911, so he knew that Kay's house had been broke into, and he told Mitch that his house had been robbed too. He said the whole blame place was a mess. Michael said that he'd just called his mother at work to let her know. Mitch had one of them, what the heck did I just walk in 2 minutes, and got pretty worried about the situation. He told Michael that he probably shouldn't go back inside his house because whoever broke into it just might still be there. Then Mitch went back to his truck and pulled out the gun that he kept in his glove box just in case things went any further south than they already was. Then he went back and waited with Michael for the police to roll up. It didn't take Sergeant Jimmy Edmonds of the Columbia County Sheriff's Office but a few minutes to roll up on Kay's house, and other deputies started showing up right behind him. Then, with his back up there, he walked around the house to the broken back door. Before he even went in the house, he knew shit was about to get deep because he could see blood on the kitchen floor. They made entry into the house and saw a blood trail that went all the way out through the kitchen and down the hall. And it was on the floor, the wall, and everything else, just splattered full of it. They followed the blood trail and saw a bloody handprint on the wall right beside the door to the garage, and opened the door where they saw Kay lying on the floor in a big puddle of blood. They ran over, and Sergeant Edmonds himself checked her pulse, and to beat it all, Kay was still alive, so they called EMS to step in. Sergeant Edmonds had been investigating violent crime for many a year, but he ain't never seen somebody beat up as bad as Kay was. There was a bloody baseball bat laying beside Kay, and he was pretty sure that was what the maniac used on her. Then he saw that there was another weapon under the car. It was a bloody claw hammer. That's about the time that the ambulance got there, and they rushed Kay over to the hospital. As soon as she was gone, Sergeant Edmonds poked around, seeing the empty McDonald's bag and coffee, thinking that it looked exactly like Kay must have come home in the middle of a robbery. In fact, it looked a little too much like that's what happened. But most of the time, when a robber gets interrupted, they run. They don't spend time taking a hammer followed by a Louisville slugger to somebody's head like they're starring in the new movie Walking Tall. Moreover, I guess I think it'd be more like Walking Small if you ask me, but Sergeant Edmonds thought that it might be just a little more personal because it was so violent. He wasn't looking forward to going next door to look at the second break-in because he'd done seen enough to last him for a little while. He was afraid that since the nut job done went full Bob Vila and Hank Aaron on Kay, he must have wondered if the unsub might have went next door and went to Tiger Woods on somebody else, seeing that they wouldn't want to repeat performance of the same thing twice in one day. So, dreading the trip, he got his homies back together, and they all went over to have a look at the back door to where the house was broke into, just like over at Kay's house. House looked like somebody loaded a cannon with a Goodwill store and blasted it all over the inside the house. There were smears of blood there too, but not anywhere as much as was at Kay's house. The deputies went through the house from top to bottom and were pretty glad when they didn't find another victim. That's about the time that Kay's friend Becky Sears and her 19-year-old son Chris rolled up in the backyard. Becky told Sergeant Edmonds that both of them were at work when their son Michael had called to tell her about the break-in, so they dashed on home as fast as they could get there. Becky didn't care too much about the fact that her house had been hit by a tornado, because she just found out that her friend Kay had been carted off in the ambulance with a swelled up head. All she wanted to know was that Kay was all right. So Becky and Chris rushed out and headed for the hospital as fast as they could go. Next thing Sergeant Edmonds had to do was call Kay's husband and tell him he needed to get home as fast as he could get there. Now, we all know that when the police call in that kind of situation, they never good, and David could tell that something bad done happened. So even though he didn't yet know what happened, he jumped on the next flight back to Georgia and hurried home. Here's about the time I was thinking, yeah, sure, David don't know what happened. I was sure that when I read that he was probably dancing around the hotel room celebrating the departure of the late Kay Parsons, who wasn't even dead, and standing in front of the mirror with his fancy L.A. escort trying to practice that long horse face of doom that he was going to have to sport when he gets home without smiling. Meanwhile, back at the scene, Sergeant Edmonds had pretty much figured out how it all went down. He knew that he was dealing with a grade A certified piece of dog squeeze that had enough ice water in his veins to use a poor helpless woman for batting practice until she was within about an inch of her life, and then feel like they hadn't done nigh on enough. They walked next door like John Wayne and Rio Bravo with teeth, hair, and blood all over them, and tore apart the house next door too. Becky and a few of Kay's friends showed up to the hospital to sit in the waiting room all day long. Every now and again, Becky would get the attention of somebody and try to find out something from the nurses and see if she could go back and see Kay. But they always said no. I reckon she wasn't up for a fat report on a date that she was trying to fight for her life. Another friend slid through the cracks and made it to Kay, and she couldn't even recognize the poor woman. She said Kay's face was all bandaged up and blue and swollen with all kind of tubes and wires coming up and hooked to her. Finally, David got there that evening. Sergeant Edmonds escorted David on into Kay's room, and they let him go in by himself. It wasn't but just a few seconds or a few minutes when Kay's friends heard David start crying. He pretty much walked in about the same time that Kay died. Of course, Kay's friends started crying when they heard David crying. Sergeant Edmonds couldn't help but feel like maybe David deserved the Oscar, because his crying seemed just a scotch over the top, but he knew it was each to his own when it came to how folks reacted to things like that. By then, police had gone door to door all through the neighborhood to try to find out more information about what happened, but so far they'd come up bone dry. Ain't nobody seen or heard nothing. So, after Sergeant Edmonds got back to the sheriff's department, he decided that he would just go out and drag everybody that was standing around the crime scene in and give them one of them cop chats. And he started with Handyman Mitch, who told him that what happened from his point of view, he didn't suspect that Handyman Mitch did anything wrong. After all, investigators had searched Kay's house and hadn't found nothing indicating that Mitch ever so much as let a piece of his lint go inside. Of course, Mitch sang investigators a song about the young man with black hair that was perched on the rock wall across the road looking like a buzzard. Once Mitch dropped the name Michael Bowers, Sergeant Edmonds' ears perked up. He'd already found out that Michael had a drug problem. Michael had him a taste of the smack and became a heroin addict. That begged the question as to why Michael was sitting on a rock wall staring at Kay's house like he was watching Sanford and Son instead of sitting in front of his own house, which had just been burgled. Sergeant Edmonds started thinking that maybe Michael tried to rob Kay's house to finance a ride on the Dragon. But Kay came in right in the middle of it, and he started batting practice. The reason she had to go, I guess, was because she would have put the finger on him. So he went ahead and played a healthy round of home run derby. It was pretty obvious that Michael had to come on down to the station after that. Now, when he got there, he was led to the hot box where he sat at a table. Sergeant Edmonds was straight up with him and asked if he still used drugs. Michael said that he did, and he said he was still fighting his heroin addiction. And in fact, the day of the murder, he had used methadone to try to curb his craving. He said that his mother dropped him off at 7 o'clock for a house painting job, but heck, he couldn't remember who he was working for or where the house was that he was painting. He ended up admitting later on that he lied about the house painting job because he didn't want his mother to know that he really didn't have a job. He said that he'd really been watching TV at a friend's house with another friend. Sergeant Edmonds walked out of the room and let Michael sit there for about 3 hours while he decided what he was going to do with him. Despite it all, they really didn't have nothing on him and had to let him go. The worm turned a little bit when Sergeant Edmonds asked the last question. He asked Michael to see the bottom of his shoe. When Michael whipped them feet up and showed him, they saw a shard of broken glass wedged in the tread of them shoes. Well, now, that led to another question. Something like, where'd that glass come from? Michael didn't have any idea where the glass was there, or even where it come from. So he said, and that's how Michael secured his spot as the primary suspect in the Kay Parsons murder sweepstakes. Once Michael left, Sergeant Edmonds pretty much had time to walk out and get him a cup of hot coffee, that coffee that would taste slightly less harsh than a deck stain, before Michael's 19-year-old brother Chris showed up for his interview. Now, yes, I've had coffee, got quite a taste for it from my days on the rescue squad, and, well, believe it or not, now the lovely and gracious Mrs. Bentley likes it too. Anyway, Chris blamed his brother Michael right smack up under the bus when he started off about Michael pretty much ran with a pack of jackals. Not literally, but was pretty much how he described Michael's bad crowd of friends. Sergeant Edmonds asked him, well, maybe you could name the bad men, and he wrote them down as Chris rattled them off. Of course, the first stop for Sergeant Edmonds was Michael's friend, who was allegedly watching TV with him while Kay was involved in a deadly T-ball game. Michael's friend said that he and Michael were absolutely watching TV when the crime took place, and he even offered to take a polygraph test right there and then. And I expect he nearly passed out when the machine blew a gasket and bounced off the wall because he felt so bad. At that point, it wasn't looking good for Michael. Sergeant Edmonds called up the owner of the physical therapy clinic where Michael's mother Becky worked, and the owner told him that Michael had stole a company checkbook and wrote him a mess of checks to the tune of about $800 before he got caught. The owner agreed not to call the cops after Becky promised that Michael would never darken the door of that clinic again. That evening, Kay's good friend Becky was leaving work at the physical therapy clinic when a man wearing black clothes and a white baseball cap stepped out of the woodwork. The man started screaming at her about wanting his money. He wasn't messing around because he started waving a gun in Becky's face. Finally, when he got tired of her sniveling about not knowing nothing about no money, he tried to kneecap her by shooting her in her left shin. The bullet glanced off the bone and grazed Becky's right ankle. Of course, she hit the ground, flopping like a wet trout on a creek bank. The man stepped up and got right in her face and said the next time he was going to shoot her in the face. Then he just melted right back in the dark. Becky managed to grab her phone and call 911 after that. The ambulance rolled up, chunked her in the back, and carted her to the hospital while the sheriff's deputies combed the woods for the nutball what did it. They didn't find him, but figured that there was no way that the attack was random, had to be connected to Kay's murder. Later, when Becky was laid up in the hospital bed, Sergeant Edmonds showed up to have a talk with her. Of course, she gave him a full rundown of her attack. He asked her if Michael might have had something to do with the shooting. She rejected that outright. He asked Becky if maybe Michael owed the shooter some drug money and if maybe the shooter was taking it out on her. She said no, or Michael used to owe certain people money, but he didn't anymore. He didn't have debts anywhere that she knew of. Then he asked Becky if she had any relationship problems. Now, Becky didn't answer that one right off the bat. She turned away, just kind of stared at the wall. Then, while she kept staring at the wall, she told him that she had a terrible secret that she needed to get off her chest. She told him that she had cheated on her husband. She said that her husband was a long-haul truck driver and was away a whole lot of the time. She said that the affair was over and that she and her husband were working out their differences now. That's about the time that the nurses started flowing through the room to check on Becky, so Sergeant Edmonds just let it go before he found out who the mystery man was. Next morning, which was March 27th, with the investigation just about 2 days old, Sergeant Edmonds, who was probably running on fumes from a constant unending investigation, heard his phone ring. He grabbed it, and somebody said that they had information about Kay's murder, and he needed to hear it. Of course, he asked who it was, but they told him that they were close to Becky and her family. Then the caller said that they knew that Becky was having an affair with Kay's husband, David. The caller said that they'd been bumping uglies for about 6 months before a murder. While her husband, Tony, was coming home, eating supper, and thinking he was in an episode of The Little House on the Prairie, the two lovebirds were writing love letters back and forth and hooking up all over town about every time Becky left the house. Becky was wanting both of them to leave their spouses so they could be together, but David was afraid of losing custody of his son if he divorced Kay. After the unknown caller hung up, the first one Sergeant Edmonds wanted to talk to was Mr. David, but he had to wait till after Kay's funeral, which just happened to be that very day. At Kay's funeral, David was surrounded by all the loving supporters who had no idea that he had been stealing side slices from his wife's best friend. At the end of the service, David, Becky, and all of Kay's loved ones stood and watched the casket get wheeled out with their long horse faces of doom, just like I thought David was probably practicing. Once they slammed the hearse door closed for the trip to the cemetery, David and his son walked to a car so they could follow the hearse. Sergeant Edmonds stepped up and stopped him right there. He grabbed David by the arm and told him that he needed to talk to him and it needed to be right now. He asked David to join him at the station right after Kay got planted. That evening, David showed up and with his tear-stained cheeks and sat in the same interrogation room, in fact the same chair that Michael had sat in early. Sergeant Edmonds heard that, or had about had it with the runaround, and told David straight up that he was in serious trouble and that he wouldn't be doing anybody any good if he lied and ended up going to jail over it. David must have knew the jig was up because he just nodded his head. Sergeant Edmonds asked him what was up with all the hanky-panky with Kay's best friend. David fessed up and said that all the teeth shaking and tree climbing with Becky started about 6 months ago on the tennis court when him, Kay, Tony, and Becky were playing double. Not long after that, the two started meeting up at his house, her mother's house, and in their cars like they were at a high school prom. David said that they fell in love, but he was just not ready to upset his own marriage because he'd surely lose his son. He said that he'd broken things off with Becky a month before Kay had her run in with the Louisville Slugger. David said that Becky was devastated, apparently because he was such a prize, but she accepted it and decided to focus on her own marriage. She admitted to her husband that she had been having an affair with their neighbor David, and her husband didn't take it very well. I reckon the little house was on fire now. Now, he was so dang mad that he called Kay to bring her up to speed on the happenings of the last 6 months. Kay was shocked because she didn't know what they'd been up to either. After that, David said that, well, he hit his knees and begged for Kay's forgiveness. Kind of like Ric Flair used to do, just to draw his opponent off guard so he could gouge him in the eye. David said that he was shocked when Kay accepted his apology, and instead of throwing everything that he had out of the house all over the front lawn and screaming, "Get the F out." And she told him that they'd worked through it together, but they wasn't fixing to stay next door to Becky. She said that they needed to sell the house just as soon as they could unload it. And then she quit her job where her and Becky worked and never spoke to Becky again. David said that he was done speaking to Becky too, and that he was ready to make a fresh start. And once David shut his yap, Sergeant Edmonds just stared at him in stunned silence for a second or two, probably wondering just how stupid David thought he was, because the whole time David was waxing forgiveness for something that was all over, Sergeant Edmonds had all of David's cell phone records right in front of him and had been scrolling through them. He saw where David just kept right on talking to Becky after the breakup. There was even a call that lasted near 2 hours in the night before Kay's murder. When Sergeant Edmonds pointed out that David was lying like a cheap carpet, David's face turned so red that he could have lit a cigar off his forehead. Now, he admitted that he talked to Becky for a few times after the breakup, but it was just to see how she was holding up. But on the night before Kay's murder, while David was probably partying it up on the LA escort scene, on business, of course, he admitted that the 2-hour call that he had with Becky had devolved into a full-blown sexual interlude over the phone. Don't ask me how that works. I couldn't even imagine. Sergeant Edmonds told David that, well, that might explain the call the night before the murder, but David had called Becky about the same time that somebody was swatting Kay in the head with a ball bat. What about that one? David said that he'd talked to Becky on the morning of the murder because he had been worried about his wife. Kay hadn't answered the phone when he called, so he called Becky to see if maybe she knew anything about Kay. Makes me wonder if he was calling to find out why Kay was still walking the earth because she ain't been whacked yet. David did add that the last thing he would ever want to do is take his son's mother away. Sergeant Edmonds got up and walked out of the room, then went around to where he could watch David from the other side of one-way glass. All David did was turn on the waterworks and start crying, muttering that everybody was going to blame me. Later that evening, Sergeant Edmonds was at his desk, probably fixing to finally go get a few hours sleep, when he got a call from the inmate at the county jail. The inmate said that he knew who killed Kay Parsons. Of course, Sergeant Edmonds asked him why he needed to trust a guy that was in jail, especially at the time Kay was killed. So he needed to know how, and he knew what he knew, and didn't believe he knew squat. He told Sergeant Edmonds before he wound up in jail, Kay's killer asked him to help him kill Kay. Well, Sergeant Edmonds hung up the phone, headed over to the jail. The anonymous inmate filled him in on the why-twos and when-fours of what happened when he walked out of the jail. He pretty much figured out who killed Kay, and what he learned led him to figure out what happened. At about 7:15 on the morning of the murder, the maniac saw Kay driving home. He'd been watching for her, so they snuck around back of Kay's house to the French doors that handyman Mitch was supposed to fix. Killer just happened to be holding a claw hammer, which they used to fix them doors by smashing in one of the glass. And then they reached in, unlocked the door, and walked right into Kay's kitchen. Kay was coming in through the front door about the same time. Nutball stood there like a copperhead ready to strike, waiting to see what Kay would do next. Kay must have heard the glass break because she walked in the kitchen to see what was going on. That's when she saw the murderer, who she recognized, standing there with a hammer. Kay took a breath to scream and at the same time turned to make a break for it. That's when the piece of dog squeeze pounced, swinging the hammer like a full-blown lunatic, whacking Kay in the front, back, both arms, chest, neck, and head, smacking blood all over the place. Kay stumbled a bit, but managed to get away from the whackadoodle. That shocked the idiot that Kay was still moving, so they watched Kay stumble down the hallway toward the garage. When Kay got to the door, the nut job snapped out of it and realized that they better do something or their ass was going straight to jail, not past go, and without $200. So they snapped out and ran Kay down. Kay did manage to get the door open and stagger into the garage, but by the time she was pretty beat up, she just fell right by the car. The maniac got there about the time she hit the ground. By then, the hammer was so slick from the blood that it slipped out of their hand and went under Kay's car. That's when the maniac panicked, and they looked around for something else to whack, poke, stab, cut, or shoot Kay with. That's when they saw a Louisville Slugger propped up against the wall. They grabbed that and whacked Kay until they thought they had a hernia, and Kay was dead. When they were done, the garage, the killer, and Kay were all covered in blood, teeth, and hair. The idiot dropped the bat like he just smacked a walk-off grand slam and ran back inside the trashy house. Then they thought that they were pretty slick, so they snuck back out through the French door and stepped in the broken glass when they did. When they slithered right next door and destroyed Becky's house, too. After they got done with all that, they took off the bloody clothes and probably stuffed them in a couple of them Walmart baggies. They dug them out a fresh set of clothes and changed into them. Then they pulled out their phone and called their mother Becky. Michael Bowers, who right about now everybody's thinking is the one who went over to Kay's for batting practice, didn't have a thing in the world to do with it. It was Becky's son, Chris, that murdered Kay. Chris was always Becky's favorite, which no wonder Michael did drugs. Chris would do just about anything in the world to make his mama happy. Becky told Chris all about the slap and tickle with David, and David was still in love with her, so Chris figured that Kay stood right directly in the way of his mama's happiness. Becky had even told Chris that she'd like to see Kay dead. That's what the inmate at the jail had told Sergeant Edmond. He turned out to be Becky's own brother, and that's how he knew what he knew. So, after Chris hammered Kay and called his mom, she left work, drove home, picked him up, hauled off the bloody clothes, and then came back to the house because that was about the time Michael called her to tell her that the house was trashed. Of course, when she and Chris got back there, police were crawling all over the place like maple syrup. Now, I hear you, what about Becky's decapping? Chris was the big bad man that peered out of the woodwork and busted a cap in Becky's shin bone. They staged the whole thing, thinking that Sergeant Edmond was dumber than a sack full of rock. Even after admitting all that, Becky still said that she didn't have nothing to do with Kay's murder. She said that she didn't mean to give Chris the impression that she really wanted him to go beat Kay to death. And Becky and Chris, well, they were pounced on, arrested, and dragged downtown, charged up like a jump-started die-hard battery with capital murder. Instead of trial, they both pled guilty to the murder of Kay Parsons, because down in Georgia they got the death penalty and they use it. Both are now sitting in prison, probably Rayford if I had to guess. Since there's no parole involved, they'll be wheeled out feet first after they're found curled up like a wet fish in their cell someday. I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend Podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend, and I will see you then.